I'm going to talk about crocheting with Baby Suri. So this is a yarn that's similar to mohair, and here I've got a Baby Suri Alpaca 74% with 26% mulberry silk. So this is kind of similar to kid silk mohair. It's a lightweight yarn which is classed as a heavy lace weight, so you'll need a needle or hook size between 3 and 5mm depending on what you want to go for. So this is often suggested as an alternative to mohair for people that find mohair irritating next to the skin, but it has got alpaca in, and I know that is an issue for some people, but it is an option worth trying if you find that the mohair is too irritating. So I've got some work here that is actually made. This is made in kid silk mohair, also Lottie Knits. I'll put a link in the comments of my video. And then here I've got a little sample that I've crocheted up in Baby Suri. So you can see the difference. There's slightly less of a halo with the Baby Suri, but overall it has got quite a similar look. Texture, I would say, although the kid silk mohair is very soft, this has got a softer, slightly plumper feel. It feels like it's just the yarn is a little bit more dense. So the other thing I would mention, a difference between the kid silk mohair and the Baby Suri, is the kind of distribution of fluff along this yarn strand. So it's kind of quite uneven. I wouldn't go so far as to call it slubby, but you will kind of get areas where there's less fluff than others. And because this yarn has been hand dyed, it's quite attractive because you can see some of the inner core of the silk coming through, which does give the stitch quite an attractive texture with the slight variance of colour. So this, as I said, the distribution of fluff isn't as even. However, the overall effect once crocheted up, you don't really notice that. It does kind of even itself out across the stitches. The other thing I would say that I noticed about working with this yarn is that there's actually very little shedding. So when I've worked with kid silk mohair in the past, you do get an awful lot of little bits of fluff coming off as you're crocheting that kind of float into the air. It can get into your eyes, and you notice it as well on the work surface, little tiny little fibres that have shed off. With this, even as I've been frogging, there is very little coming off it. So this might be another reason why it's more suitable than kid mohair for some people, because you've got less chance of these particles coming off and irritating your skin, your eyes and your nose. So I've crocheted up some swatches, so I'll show you those first before I go into talking about whether or how easy it is or how easy it isn't to crochet with this kind of yarn. Maybe sort of dispel some of the myths about that. So here is a little swatch that I've crocheted up in single crochet or UK double crochet, and I've used a 3.5mm hook. So you can see it does give quite a nice floaty fabric. I think this kind of yarn is best worked up in a slightly larger hook size, because you're probably going to be making garments or scarves out of it, so you don't really want the fabric to be too stiff. Here is a sample in extended single crochet, which is, in my opinion, an underused and underrated stitch. And then I've got a half double crochet sample here, which is a UK half treble. So that's really nice. And then here I've got UK double, US double, UK treble crochet. Which although generally double crochets are such long stitches, they do kind of can make quite an open stitch if you're using slightly larger hook than recommended. You can kind of get away with it with this Baby Suri, because the sort of halo of fluff kind of does fill in some of these little gaps and kind of helps to mesh the fabric together, which I think would make it really good for like a scarf wrap or a floaty top. Here's a more lacy and open stitch. I've just used a kind of V-stitch, which creates kind of nice meshy stitch. This would give you really good yardage if you wanted to make a wrap or even a kind of throw over top. So I thought I'd just demonstrate a little bit of crocheting with this yarn, because I know that there is quite a widespread belief that crocheting with this kind of yarn is quite tricky. So while I wouldn't deny that it's not as easy as crocheting with the nice smooth yarn, I also don't actually think it's as bad as people make out. So especially if you are using open stitches or maybe working into spaces, if you do think you're going to struggle, you might be better off going for stitches where you are crocheting into spaces, like here I'm sort of making these little shells. So here I am going into a stitch, and because of this core of silk in the middle, and the fluff isn't too dense on the yarn, I don't think it's actually that difficult to spot the stitches. So with this Baby Suri, I don't think stitch visibility is a particular issue here. And like I said, if you are worried, then you can choose a stitch where you're mostly going into spaces, which are obviously much easier to find than stitches. However, I didn't have any problems at all crocheting my samples of single, half, double and treble crochets. So there's another kind of belief that frogging this kind of yarn is really tricky. So again, I would say, from my experience having sampled this yarn, I would say that frogging isn't as difficult as people think. As you can see, I'm here frogging this yarn and it's kind of going quite smoothly. You do occasionally hit a little snag like here, but the trick is to kind of look quite closely at the point where it's snagged, and it's usually just where the halo is kind of meshed into another section of yarn. Or sometimes the halo can build up and create almost like a little noose around the yarn. So the trick is just to actually unravel it quite slowly and gently, and of course remembering to wind this back onto your ball, otherwise you will end up with a big tangle mess. So I don't actually think frogging is a major issue with this particular type of Baby Suri. So if you are the kind of person, so here again I've got a little snag, but if I look closely I can see that it's just where the fluff is kind of meshed together, and if I pull that gently it will actually come apart. So the trick is, once it snags, loosen it up, pull it again, loosen it up, pull it again. So yeah, so I don't think it's a major concern if you are the kind of person that does feel like you have to, that you do make mistakes and you are likely to have to frog. then I don't think this is a major concern, as long as you're careful when you're actually frogging, not to just rip, but do it quite carefully, stitch by stitch. Occasionally you might come to quite a badly stuck together part like here, and I mentioned before that sometimes the halo can form a kind of noose around the yarn. So if you look closely here, you can see that there's a little loop here around this bit of yarn and this bit of yarn, and it's not actually any part of the stitch, it's just the, I've actually managed to loosen it myself, but if you get a loop, a little noose that's quite tight, you can actually just snip it like that. And this is actually because I frogged this little bit here multiple times where I was swatching. So if you noticed at the beginning when I was frogging, didn't have very many problems. So these problems with the frogging do seem to get worse if you've frogged and recrocheted something multiple times. So I'm actually in the process of designing a top with this particular stitch, and I will also be using this exact yarn from Lottie Knits. So if you'd like to see how that turns out and you're interested in the pattern, please like and subscribe to my channel so that I can keep you up to date with my latest designs. Thank you.